Today's video is a detailed review and analysis of the movie Train Dreams, starring Joel Edgerton. This is not a full movie, and not a movie screening. In this video, we will break down the complete story of the film, and explain how the plot develops from start to end. We will talk about the main cast and supporting cast, their roles, and their performances. We will also cover the movie's production, development process, and the creative choices behind it. You will learn where the story was inspired from, who wrote it, and what the original idea and purpose were. Along with the creative side, we will analyze the movie's budget, box office performance, and overall business results. Every important element of the film is explained and reviewed from a viewer's perspective. So let's begin and take a closer look at Train Dreams. Robert Grenier arrived at Bonners Ferry, an orphaned boy with nothing but silence. School held no interest for him. He wandered aimlessly, searching for any purpose. The Great Northern Railway brought him into Idaho, a land both harsh and endless. Logging camps became his home. Men worked hard, spoke little, danger always nearby. He witnessed a Chinese worker thrown from a bridge, a moment that haunted him. Dreams of trains filled his sleep, carrying shadows of the past he could not escape. Seasons changed. Robert grew stronger, yet solitude pressed heavily on his young shoulders. He met men who left impressions, some kind, some cruel, all transient in memory. On Peoples became his friend. Laughter broke through the gloom, brief and fragile. Then tragedy struck. A branch fell, killing Arn, leaving Robert stunned and silent. Robert found work closer to home, but opportunities were scarce in post-war Idaho. He met Gladys Alding, steady and kind, whose presence began to reshape his lonely life. They married in spring, building a log cabin along the Moyu River together. A daughter, Kate, arrived, filling their home with light, laughter, and fragile hope. Robert worked the Spokane International Railway, leaving home for months at a time. Each return was bittersweet. The cabin and family gave warmth against his exhaustion. Logging was unforgiving. Men died suddenly, machinery and nature equally merciless. One man killed by vigilantes, another crushed by falling trees. Scars on Robert's memory. He carried each death silently, etching grief into the quiet lines of his face. Robert sought companionship, finding a strange comfort in the rhythms of work and forest. Gladys suggested farming, a lumber mill, to slow the relentless pace of his labor. Hope stirred briefly, but life proved fragile, disasters waiting just around the river bend. A wildfire consumed their cabin. Gladys and Kate vanished in flames, leaving only ash. Robert wandered the remains, grief a constant shadow, solace nowhere to be found. Ignatius Jack brought company, steady presence, helping Robert rebuild a semblance of life. Returning to logging after loss, he felt disconnected from younger, faster, rougher men. The post-war economy pressed heavily. Jobs were scarce, wages lower than ever before. Robert tried carriage driving, a gentler task, slower pace, peace and repetitive movement. Claire Thompson arrived from the Forest Service, gentle encouragement, softening his despair. She shared her grief over her husband's death. Robert listened, silent understanding bridging worlds. He wandered the woods, imagining the spirits of Gladys and Kate lingering nearby always. One night, Kate seemed to return, injured and fleeting. He tended her carefully. Morning revealed emptiness. The window open, a trick of dreams, leaving hope suspended. Robert resolved to stay at the cabin, a sentinel waiting for impossible returns. Years passed. Technology advanced. Towns changed. Robert remained anchored to memory. Televisions showed John Glenn's space flight. He marveled, quietly connected yet apart. Seasons rolled onward, each winter harsher, snow and wind etching wisdom in his face. He met loggers, townspeople, travelers, all leaving echoes, shaping his solitary understanding. Old friends died, new faces arrived. Robert endured, learning patience in the vast forest. Memories of fire, loss, and fleeting happiness interwove with the routine of daily life. The river carried him through reflection, solitude, and the delicate touch of memory. Robert remembered the first train, the orphaned boy, the emptiness that carved him whole. Work, nature, friendship, love all transient, yet each defined him in ways unseen. He learned silence was not emptiness, but the language of enduring and observing carefully. The cabin stood rebuilt, timber and sweat marking the effort, a fortress of memory. Logging camps faded in memory. He sought peace, small joys in mundane daily rituals. Claire Thompson's words lingered. Grief is shared pain, yet healing comes in quiet moments. Robert felt her presence linger, understanding her pain as echo of his own hidden sorrow. He wandered along rivers and trails, watching seasons bloom and fade, patient and silent. Life passed. Losses accumulated, joys small, yet each day offered something quietly miraculous. Evening skies reminded him of youth, trains, distant mountains, and the endless horizon. Robert learned the voices of the forest, the whispers of wind through pines, comforted him. Time brought wrinkles, silver hair, the slow ache of muscles, wisdom in slow steps. Memories of Gladys, Kate, friends long gone, carved his soul into an enduring solitude. He watched the world change, towns modernized, trains speed past faster than his life. Yet, he remained anchored in the past. Cabin and river, silent witness to passage of time. Robert found beauty in small things. Snowflakes, river currents, birds settling in pines. The Great Northern Railway remained a connection, both literal and symbolic, to his past. Even in solitude, he felt rhythm, the heartbeat of nature, a steady companion always. Life continued. The train's whistle reminded him of beginnings, journeys, endings, all entwined. Robert continued walking through the woods, listening to the quiet murmur of trees. Evenings were long. He felt the presence of his family lingering in the shadows. He built small improvements around the cabin, reinforcing walls against winter's harsh attacks. Seasons rolled onward. Snow melted into streams, carrying memories and small traces of life. Robert met traveling loggers, men who shared stories, drinks, and occasional laughter briefly. Logging camps changed. Machines replaced axes. Younger men mocked old methods and wisdom. He observed quietly, learning patience, understanding the rhythm of human toil and nature. He felt disconnected, yet rooted. The forest and river were constant, steady companions. The river carried reflections of lost times, love, and the fragile joys of youth. Robert remembered the fire, flames consuming home, memories smoldering, loss permanent and haunting. Letters from townsfolk arrived rarely. He read them with curiosity, remembering connections once alive. Claire Thompson's visits offered counsel, wisdom, and quiet encouragement in lonely winter months. Robert attempted small repairs on the lumber mill, hoping to restart a gentle livelihood. The mill creaked, gears groaned. He observed nature's strength and human fragility every day. He hunted deer, fished trout, surviving on skill, memory, and the gifts of nature. Every morning, he walked the trails, imagining his daughter's laughter echoing through the pines. Memories of Gladys's smile warmed his soul, though her absence left a persistent ache. Robert felt time pressing forward. His body slowed, yet his mind remained alert and sharp. Logging friends died or moved on. He buried them silently, carrying grief in solitude. Machines replaced men. Technology advanced faster than Robert's ability to adapt to change. He walked to the railway, watching trains rush past, carrying strangers, stories, and possibilities. The cabin became a sanctuary. He maintained it meticulously, honoring memory and past hardships. Robert noticed birds returning to the riverbanks, insects buzzing, signs of life quietly persistent. Every evening, he lit a small fire, reflecting on fleeting joys and accumulated sorrow. Claire offered books, conversations about forests, history, and human endurance, bridging isolation gently. Robert repaired fences, painted doors, each task grounding him in small, achievable work. He observed wildlife cautiously, aware of predators, weather, and subtle shifts in seasons. Occasionally, he traveled into Spokane, witnessing modern life, bustling, unfamiliar yet fascinating. He saw radio signals, television broadcasts, new technology shaping human habits, progress unstoppable. Letters and postcards reminded him of family far away. Yet he stayed committed to the cabin. His muscles ached. Yet, he chopped wood daily, maintaining a rhythm that honored the past. The winter storms were harsh. Snow drifted, rivers froze, and Robert endured silently, patiently. He discovered abandoned cabins, relics of pioneers, marking the passage of previous lives. Memories of fire lingered, yet he rebuilt small structures to preserve history and hope. The river often swelled. He watched logs float past, symbols of fleeting moments and persistence. Robert trained young men occasionally, teaching them survival, respect for forests, patience, and skill. He recalled armed peoples, laughter shared, sudden death. Grief became a companion, quiet but constant. Animals returned gradually, deer grazing near the cabin, wolves distant yet present, teaching caution. He built small furniture, repaired tools, his hands learning endurance and creative perseverance daily. Claire's visits remained a light. Stories of human connection bridged the loneliness of decades. Robert navigated changing seasons, harvests, and harsh winters with quiet observation and careful skill. He often stared at the stars, pondering existence, time, and his own unrecorded story. Railway whistle carried nostalgia. Trains reminded him of childhood journeys, beginnings, losses, and hope. The landscape changed subtly. Roads, bridges, and small towns grew, altering his familiar world. Robert's dreams carried images of Kate, Gladys, and faces long gone, lingering in memory. He carved small notches in wood, marking years, events, and the passing of life itself. Logging operations continued elsewhere. Accidents happened. Some friends injured or killed. Lessons learned. Robert adapted slowly to technology. His mind balanced memory with acceptance of modernity's intrusion. He often walked through burned lands, seeing regrowth, resilience of nature despite human absence. Every tool, log, and nail became part of his personal history, silent testament of labor. Claire discussed conservation, history, and forest preservation. Robert listened, absorbing new ideas carefully. He witnessed seasons change into harsh winter again, snow falling silently, covering old footprints. His connection with nature deepened. He understood subtle rhythms, the passage of time and cycles. Occasionally, strangers arrived seeking lodging. Robert offered shelter, but mostly remained withdrawn. Memories of his wife and daughter haunted him during long nights near the fireplace. Spring brought renewal. Rivers thawed, trees blossomed, birds returned, and Robert felt faint hope. He repaired canoes, paddled quietly, feeling a connection to the river's enduring current and flow. Years passed steadily. Robert aged, hair silvered, skin weathered, yet his mind stayed clear. He spoke rarely, but when he did, words were thoughtful, reflecting a life of observation. Logging tools rusted, machinery advanced. The forest reclaimed areas once cleared by human hands. Robert maintained journals, writing down events, thoughts, and memories, leaving traces of existence. He built small bridges over streams, repaired fences, keeping alive skills long practiced by hands. Claire reminded him of mortality, but encouraged him to value life and its persistent beauty. He observed children playing near riverbanks, laughing freely, a reminder of joy once shared. Robert reflected on loss, fire, death, separation, yet also moments of fleeting happiness survived memory. Winter storms passed. Spring returned, rivers flowed, and Robert felt connected to cycles once more. He repaired cabins, fences, and machinery, each action a tribute to life's resilience and persistence. Robert watched trains with curiosity, imagining distant lands and the stories carried within steel wheels. He encountered travelers seeking direction, sometimes offering guidance, other times silently observing human folly. Memories of fire, lost family, and friends blended with present, forming a tapestry of endurance. He found solace in forests, rivers, and quiet evenings, where reflection balanced grief and memory. The morning mist hung over the river as Robert walked through the empty fields. He noticed the remnants of the cabin burned long ago. Memories rushing back sharply. The wind whispered softly, carrying the faint scent of pine and smoke from afar. Robert paused near the old logging trail, remembering the Chinese worker who had fallen. The memory of his screams haunted him as the trains rumbled past without mercy. Each log he passed seemed like a ghost. Carrying stories of men who had vanished, Robert's eyes scanned the horizon where the mountains met the cloudy gray sky. He heard the distant whistle of the Great Northern, echoing memories of childhood journeys. The sounds of construction and hammering returned briefly. Blending with the natural silence, he thought of Gladys, imagining her in the cabin, humming softly by the fireplace. The river glimmered in patches as sunlight broke through the lingering morning fog. Robert's steps slowed as he approached the meadow where Kate used to play. He crouched to inspect the wildflowers. Their colors faded, yet stubbornly bright. Years of solitude had etched deep lines upon his face, telling stories without words. The old bridge stood like a monument, and he recalled the tales of violence there. Memories of the vigilante killing and the fallen loggers churned uneasily within him. Robert remembered Boomer's injury and the helpless look in his young eyes. He traced the worn path to the logging camp, noting new equipment scattered oddly. Every corner of the forest seemed to whisper secrets. Urging him to listen closely, Robert stopped by a hollow tree, recalling the makeshift graves marked by boots. He ran his fingers over the bark, imagining the spirits of men lingering silently. The sun climbed higher, casting golden light on frost-tipped grass and fallen leaves. The air carried a crispness that reminded him of winter mornings long past. Robert resumed walking, feeling the weight of decades pressing gently upon his shoulders. The scent of pine resin mingled with smoke from distant chimneys. Oddly comforting, he saw a cabin foundation, half buried by overgrowth, proof of lives once lived. Walking slowly, he thought of logging seasons that took him far from home. Each memory mingled with sorrow, yet faint moments of joy sparkled fleetingly. Robert paused to listen to a distant woodpecker. Rhythm steady and unyielding, he recalled Claire Thompson's encouraging words, guiding him subtly toward healing. The old forest seemed alive, breathing around him, watching him with patient silence. He approached a cleared area, where the town had once held small gatherings. Robert remembered simple pleasures, laughter, shared meals, stories told by firelight. The wind carried a faint echo of Gladys' voice, calling his name softly. He felt an ache in his chest, both sorrow and a gentle longing intertwined. Walking along the trail, he stumbled upon a forgotten axe half buried in dirt. Robert picked it up, remembering the strength and skill needed for early logging days. His mind drifted to Jack, whose stories of survival and friendship anchored him firmly. The distant sound of a train reminded him of childhood trips and wide-open skies. He imagined young Robert looking out, dreaming of adventures and unknown lands. Each step forward brought him closer to memories both painful and bittersweet. Robert stopped near a small creek, listening to water tumbling over smooth stones. The sound reminded him of nights spent thinking, hoping for a life more ordinary. He glanced at the horizon, mountains bathed in soft morning light, timeless and vast. The forests seemed to bend toward him, guiding him toward the cabin remains. Robert remembered the fire that took everything. Leaving him alone and grieving, he traced the path to a tree where he and Aunt once sat, sharing thoughts. Memories of laughter mixed with the pain of losses, creating a strange harmony. Robert bent to pick up a putting cone. Feeling its rough texture against his fingers, he recalled Kate's small hands, brushing leaves, chasing sunlight through the trees. Walking further, he noted signs of new growth, saplings reaching toward the sky. Time had passed, seasons changed, yet the land held echoes of past lives. Robert paused at a fallen log. Seating himself as he reflected on his journey, his thoughts drifted to the logging crew. Men he had known and lost dearly. The smell of wet earth reminded him of long hours, hard work, and survival. Robert remembered the night sky filled with stars, his dreams unbounded and fragile. He envisioned future generations, children perhaps unaware of the struggles endured here. The sun's warmth gradually increased, melting frost and bathing the meadow in light. Robert closed his eyes, imagining Kate running freely along the riverbank again. The sound of the river merged with wind through trees, a quiet symphony of nature. He stood slowly, feeling a subtle peace, as if the forest accepted his presence. Robert's boots crunched on leaves as he walked toward the distant silhouette of the cabin. The skeletal remains hinted at rebuilding, resilience hidden beneath charred timbers. He remembered the days he worked with Claire, planning and dreaming of better times. The memory of her guidance instilled hope, reminding him he could persevere onward. Robert knelt beside the foundation, imagining how walls once held warmth and laughter. He traced outlines with his fingers, connecting present solitude with past vibrancy. A gentle breeze lifted his hair, carrying whispers from trees and his own heart. Walking around the clearing, he observed how nature slowly reclaimed its dominion. He thought about how life continued, even when human hands no longer tended. Robert's eyes focused on a patch of wildflowers surviving among scorched remains. He smiled faintly, seeing continuity and the quiet power of resilience in nature. The distant sound of a train horn stirred memories, blending past with present vividly. Robert began collecting pieces of wood, thinking how he might rebuild slowly here. Every motion reminded him of labor, of hands shaping life amid hardship and sorrow. He paused to listen, letting the wind, river, and distant animals narrate their story. Robert realized each moment held lessons. If only he slowed enough to notice. The morning deepened, light shifting, shadows stretching across forest floor and meadow. Robert imagined himself younger, full of hope. Stepping onto a railway for the first time, he felt nostalgia mingle with gratitude. Appreciating life's simple and complex moments, the air smelled of pine and damp earth, grounding him in reality and memory alike. Robert began to hum softly, a tune from long ago. Connecting past and present, he traced the outlines of the cabin again, envisioning walls rising, laughter returning. The distant mountains reflected light, a silent witness to decades of struggle and growth. Robert straightened, determined to continue, walking toward where logs and timber lay. Every step seemed heavier, with memory yet lighter with the wisdom of survival. He noticed patterns of nature, fallen leaves forming shapes, guiding him subtly forward. The river's gentle rush seemed almost a heartbeat. Steady, continuous, reassuring his soul. Robert paused, thinking of the friends who had passed. Their echoes still lingering here. He breathed deeply, letting the forest fill his lungs with resilience and quiet determination. The sun now bright, warming earth and water, reflecting hope for continued rebuilding efforts. Robert picked up an old tool, feeling its weight, recalling lessons of strength and patience. The forest and river held stories, and he felt himself a part of their enduring legacy. Walking steadily, he considered how small actions today might honor the past fully. Robert's eyes lingered on a distant hill, imagining journeys yet to be taken someday. The wind shifted, carrying faint scents of pine and smoke. Tying memory to the present, he thought of nights under stars, dreams of connection, and the passage of time faithfully. Robert paused once more by the river, gazing at reflections of sky and trees alike. He took a deep breath and stepped forward, resolved to face the days ahead. Robert's journey, marked by sorrow, labor, and love, continued quietly, steadily onward. The afternoon sun warmed Robert's back as he trudged along the narrow forest path. He noticed new saplings sprouting where old trees had fallen. Life quietly persisting. Robert paused by a small stream, watching water ripple over stones worn smooth. He thought of Gladys' gentle voice, and her laughter echoing in the cabin long ago. Memories of Kate playing near the river filled him with bittersweet longing. The distant whistle of a train reminded him of journeys taken and lost. Robert examined a patch of wildflowers, vibrant against the muted forest floor. Each flower seemed to whisper resilience, teaching him that life always finds a way. He ran his fingers over a fallen branch, recalling the weight of laboring logs. The smell of pine resin mingled with earth, grounding him in this quiet present. Robert crouched to inspect tracks left by deer, imagining their unseen forest journeys. He felt the forest pulse around him, alive, observant, and quietly guiding his steps. Walking further, he discovered a clearing where sunlight bathed the ground in gold. He imagined building a small shelter here, a place to rest and reflect. The wind carried faint echoes of conversations with Jack and logging friends long gone. Robert recalled Arn people's jokes, their laughter piercing the heavy silence of work. He touched the bark of a massive fir, feeling centuries of life beneath his hands. The scent of damp leaves reminded him of autumns spent walking home with Gladys. He noticed birds flitting between branches, their movements precise, elegant, and full of life. Robert paused, listening to the gentle gurgle of a distant waterfall hidden in trees. His mind wandered to Claire Thompson, her encouraging words sparking hope for renewal. The sun shifted, casting elongated shadows across mossy stones and fallen logs. He noticed patterns in the underbrush, shapes familiar from childhood hikes with Kate. Robert sat briefly on a moss-covered rock, letting silence wash over his thoughts. He recalled the challenges of logging seasons, the fatigue and camaraderie mixed together. The wind stirred, carrying the faint scent of smoke from distant chimneys, memories resurfacing. Robert's eyes lingered on the horizon where mountains met sky, timeless and distant. He traced the line of a river bend, imagining stories of the Chinese worker he remembered. His heart tightened at the thought of tragedies witnessed, yet he pressed onward slowly. Robert found an old axe head partially buried, a relic of past labors endured. He dusted it off, recalling the skill and effort needed to fell massive trees. The afternoon deepened, light filtering through branches in golden, fragmented patterns. Robert's thoughts drifted to friends, lost and loved ones. Their presence felt faintly. He walked on, letting the forest guide him to familiar paths of memory and pain. A breeze swept across the meadow, carrying the faint sound of distant train wheels. He paused to rest against a tree, feeling its steady support beneath his weight. Robert remembered the night sky, stars above his cabin, and the vast unknown beyond. He imagined young Robert staring out a train window, dreaming of distant horizons. The gentle murmur of the river mingled with birdsong, a soft orchestra of life. Robert continued walking, mindful of each step, connecting past struggles with present stillness. He passed a fallen log, tracing its length and imagining the stories it might hold. The forest whispered memories, and Robert felt a quiet kinship with all it contained. He noticed the faint remnants of the old logging camp, tools scattered, evidence of work. Robert bent to pick up a small stone, smooth from years in the river's current. He imagined Kate running barefoot along the water, chasing sunlight and joyfully laughing. The wind shifted again, carrying scents of pine and damp soil. Mingling past and present, Robert approached a small rise. Gazing over the valley carved by time and labor, the sunlight illuminated patches of frost, now melting, reflecting a journey of survival. He stopped at a clearing, considering how he might rebuild. Slowly, carefully, faithfully, Robert recalled conversations with Jack about resilience and the importance of small progress. He ran his hands through pine needles, letting the forest's quiet rhythm soothe his mind. Walking along a familiar path, he noticed patterns in bark and leaf alike. Robert remembered the workers who had passed, their stories etched in his heart. He paused by a tree hollow, imagining life teeming within, unseen yet vital. The distant mountains reflected sunlight, standing as silent witnesses to decades of toil. Robert thought of Claire's encouragement, how small words of support could inspire courage. He walked toward the cabin site, envisioning walls rising and warmth returning once more. The air carried faint whispers of past laughter, blending with nature's gentle symphony. Robert picked up a pine cone, feeling its texture, connecting him to childhood memories. He traced the path toward the river, recalling how it had shaped his life's rhythm. The sun dipped lower, casting golden hues across fields and distant mountain peaks. Robert bent to examine footprints in soft earth, left by animals and memory alike. He paused, letting the forest envelop him, a place where time seemed both present and past. Walking steadily, he considered rebuilding slowly, honoring the lives and losses endured here. The gentle murmur of water, wind, and birds seemed to echo his own heartbeat. Robert's eyes rested on the horizon, imagining futures built carefully, patiently, with care. He picked up a fallen branch, considering it as material for a small shelter to come. The forest seemed alive, breathing, observing, quietly guiding his movements and decisions. Robert paused near a patch of wildflowers, vibrant despite past destruction. Lessons in resilience. He smiled faintly, seeing continuity, understanding that life persisted through pain and loss. The wind carried distant train whistles, reminders of journeys, endings, and beginnings intertwined. Robert collected small pieces of wood, imagining structures rising where none had stood. Every motion reminded him of labor, strength, and lessons learned through years of solitude. The forest seemed to narrate its own story, and Robert listened with patient reverence. Sunlight deepened, shadows lengthened, and he moved with the rhythm of memory and hope. Robert imagined himself young, boarding a train to unknown lands, dreams brimming with possibility. He felt nostalgia, mingled with gratitude, for each hardship endured and small triumphs won. The forest embraced him, familiar, guiding, and filled with quiet signs of life enduring. Robert hummed softly, a melody from decades past, connecting him to his younger self. He examined the foundation of the cabin, envisioning walls rising, laughter and warmth returning. The distant mountains bore witness, steadfast and silent, marking the passage of countless seasons. Robert straightened, determined to continue, stepping over logs and brush with measured care. Each step balanced memory with determination, past sorrow with present hope and resilience. The river's rhythm seemed steady, a pulse echoing through time, guiding him onward firmly. Robert paused at a moss-covered stone, letting the quiet strength of nature fill him. The sun now lower, casting amber light over forest, stream, and clearing, a peaceful glow. Robert picked up a small tool, feeling its weight and connection to decades of work. The forest and river held stories. He felt himself woven into their quiet continuity. Walking forward, he resolved to honor the past through deliberate, thoughtful actions today. Robert glanced toward the distant hills, imagining journeys still ahead, possibilities uncharted. The wind shifted, carrying pine scents and smoke, blending history with present awareness vividly. He paused by the river once more, watching reflections of sky and treetops in water. The quiet melody of life persisted around him, a guide for patient rebuilding and hope. Robert breathed deeply, inhaling forest air, letting it steady him for the days ahead. He stepped forward, embracing solitude, memories, and the forest's lessons on enduring life. Robert's journey, shaped by love, loss, labor, and hope, continued quietly and steadily onward. Robert rose early, mist curling around the cabin, and listened to the forest's soft whispers. He recalled the train tracks near Bonner's Ferry, where his childhood curiosity first stirred adventure. Walking past fallen logs, he imagined the lives of loggers who had carved this land. The river beside him glimmered, reflecting the pale light of dawn and silent mountains. Robert thought of Gladys and Kate, memories vivid, their laughter echoing through time and trees. He paused at a familiar clearing, sunlight breaking through the canopy in golden streams. Small birds flitted above, weaving through branches, their songs a delicate symphony in morning air. Robert knelt to examine footprints, some human, some animal, tracing paths both past and present. He traced the outline of an old cabin foundation, imagining walls rising slowly from the earth. The scent of pine and damp soil reminded him of long walks with his daughter Kate. A distant train whistle called to him, tugging memories of journeys and places long gone. Robert picked up a smooth stone, feeling its cool weight, connecting with the river's rhythm. He thought about Claire Thompson's encouraging words, fueling his quiet determination to keep moving. Walking carefully over mossy rocks, he recalled the hardships of logging seasons, labor intense and exhausting. The wind rustled through branches, whispering lessons of resilience, patience, and life's subtle persistence. Robert noticed wildflowers pushing through cracks in the earth, proof that life endures hardship. He remembered on people's stories, laughter breaking the weight of work and solitude in forests. The forest seemed alive, each tree and stone a witness to decades of human toil. Robert paused at the river's edge, watching reflections ripple, mirroring both past and future selves. He thought of the Chinese worker he'd seen as a boy. A life ended tragically. Shadows lengthened as the sun climbed higher, painting the forest floor with moving patterns. Robert picked up a fallen branch, considering its potential for rebuilding or kindling for warmth. He passed a thicket where deer had grazed, imagining their silent, careful movements through trees. The scent of resin and earth filled him, grounding his mind in the forest's present moment. Robert crouched by a small stream, letting water trickle through his hands, cleansing thought and memory. He remembered friends lost, and the quiet comfort of Jack's steadfast presence in trying times. The mountains in the distance reflected sunlight, unmoved by decades of human struggle and change. Robert walked on, tracing familiar trails, letting forest rhythm guide his steady steps forward. He passed the ruins of a logging camp, tools scattered, echoing labor and lives long gone. Sitting briefly on a mossy rock, Robert reflected on his life, the choices, losses, and love. The wind stirred the trees, carrying distant echoes of conversations, laughter, and forgotten songs. Robert noticed a small hollow in a tree, imagining life hidden within, thriving unseen yet vital. The forest's quiet persistence inspired him, offering lessons on endurance, patience, and steady growth. He bent to pick up a pin cone, feeling its textured surface, recalling Kate's playful hands as a child. Sunlight shifted, illuminating paths and rocks, each step now marked with intentional care and thought. Robert glanced toward the cabin, imagining rebuilding walls, memories woven with present effort and hope. The distant mountains stood eternal, silent witnesses to decades of his life's labor and sorrow. Robert straightened, resolved to continue, stepping carefully over roots and fallen branches along the path. Each motion balanced memory with determination, sorrow with hope, and work with quiet reflection. The river's pulse echoed through his mind, a reminder of time's continuity and life's enduring rhythm. Robert paused near a patch of wildflowers, marveling at color and persistence despite past devastation. He smiled faintly, sensing life's quiet tenacity, lessons carried from youth into middle and old age. Walking steadily, he collected small pieces of wood, imagining walls and hearths, rising once again. Every action reminded him of labor, endurance, and resilience, lessons from decades spent alone yet connected. The forest narrated its story, whispering guidance, patience, and a quiet acceptance of life's flow. Sunlight deepened, shadows stretching across forest floor, marking time and the passage of another day. Robert imagined young self boarding a train, dreams stretching beyond the horizon, possibilities unbounded. He breathed in pine-scented air, feeling gratitude for survival, growth, and love both lost and found. The wind shifted, carrying smoke and soil, blending memory with present awareness in gentle clarity. Robert approached the river again, reflections dancing, a mirror of time, hope, and memory combined. The forest's melody guided him forward, soft and insistent, shaping each careful, purposeful step. Robert paused at a moss-covered stone, letting the forest's quiet strength fill his heart and mind. He picked up a small tool, remembering its use in past labors, linking effort with knowledge gained. The river, the forest, the mountains, they held stories, and Robert felt woven into that timeless tapestry. Walking onward, he resolved to honor past losses, while building patiently for a steady, hopeful future. The horizon stretched before him, paths untraveled, stories yet to unfold, journeys still waiting. Robert smiled at birds overhead, the distant train whistle, the forest's steady rhythm grounding him. He bent to collect fallen wood, imagining warmth, structure, and the continuity of life and effort. Sunlight waned, filtering through trees, highlighting the quiet beauty of persistence and growth around him. Robert hummed softly, a melody from decades past, feeling connected to youth, memory, and present effort. The cabin loomed in imagination, walls slowly rising, hearth warm, laughter returning, life breathed. The mountains bore witness silently, time indifferent, yet marking seasons, labor, and endurance of human life. Robert straightened, each step deliberate, building, remembering, and moving forward, with patience and care. The river and forest continued their timeless song, echoing with resilience, guidance, and quiet continuity. Robert inhaled deeply, letting scent, memory, and rhythm steady him for days, months, and years ahead. Walking forward, he embraced solitude, love, memory, and nature's quiet lessons on endurance and hope. Robert's journey, shaped by labor, love, and reflection, moved steadily onward, into forest, time, and life. Robert followed a narrow path. Sunlight dappled through leaves, guiding him deeper into the woods. He thought of his past logging seasons, harsh labor and distant homes, each memory sharp. The scent of damp earth and pine filled him, calming thoughts of loss and loneliness. Robert paused to examine a carved tree, initials faintly etched by someone long ago. He reflected on Kate's laughter, imagining her tiny hands tracing patterns on the cabin floor. A distant train's whistle reminded him of journeys taken and those yet to come. He stepped over a fallen branch, careful not to disturb the fragile life beneath it. Birds fluttered through the canopy, casting shadows that danced on the mossy forest floor. Robert recalled Aunt People's wisdom, lessons in patience and resilience embedded in each story. The river's gentle babble accompanied him, a reminder that time flows despite human struggle. He spotted a deer grazing, pausing briefly, connecting with life beyond human toil and care. Robert picked up a smooth stone, feeling its coolness, grounding him in the present moment. Thoughts of Claire Thompson's encouragement surfaced, inspiring quiet determination to move forward steadily. Sunlight shifted as he walked, illuminating roots and rocks, guiding careful steps along the trail. He paused at a clearing, imagining the cabin rebuilt, hearth warm, filled with laughter once more. Robert noticed wildflowers peeking through moss, resilient against time, storms, and forest neglect. The wind rustled leaves, whispering tales of endurance, solitude, and the quiet passage of years. He stooped to drink from a stream, cool water, refreshing, reflecting both sky and inner thoughts. Robert recalled encounters with loggers, their stories of danger, humor, and fleeting camaraderie in work. Shadows stretched long as the sun rose higher, marking the day's slow progression through the forest. He picked up a fallen pinnacone, examining its structure, marveling at nature's intricate resilience. Robert passed a thicket where foxes had run, imagining their careful steps and secret lives. The smell of resin and soil filled his lungs, bringing memories of past toil and love. He crouched by a moss-covered stone, letting time and quiet forest rhythm wash over him. Robert thought of Fushang, the Chinese worker, and the tragedy witnessed long ago near tracks. Walking further, he noticed old logging tools abandoned, echoes of labor, sweat, and human presence. The mountains in distance stood timeless, bearing silent witness to decades of life and change. Robert bent to collect small pieces of wood, envisioning reconstruction, warmth, and continuity of life. He felt the rhythm of the forest guide his movements, a quiet cadence beneath the sun's glow. Birdsong filled the air, each note a reminder of patience, survival, and resilience across seasons. Robert paused at a creek's bend, tracing water flow with fingers, connecting past memories to now. Thoughts of Gladys surfaced, their shared years and love forming a backbone to his solitary life. The wind whispered through branches, carrying scent and echoes, grounding him in forests present. Robert continued walking, steps deliberate, letting memory, labor, and quiet reflection intertwine with action. He noticed a hollow tree, small creatures inside moving unseen, thriving silently in the forest. Sunlight slanted through canopy gaps, illuminating paths, rocks, and the intricate forest floor tapestry. Robert hummed softly, a tune remembered from childhood, feeling connection across time and memory. He crouched to examine footprints, human, animal tracing stories etched in mud and dirt. The river's gentle rush harmonized with bird calls, creating a melody of time, growth, and persistence. Robert observed scattered wildflowers, delicate yet strong, thriving against odds in forest's shaded depths. Walking onward, he gathered fallen branches for firewood, imagining warmth, shelter, and comfort anew. Memories of friends, losses, and quiet companionship filled his mind as steps moved steadily forward. The mountains watched silently, season after season, witness to human toil, sorrow, and endurance. Robert paused atop a small hill, gazing across valley, forests, and distant rivers, reflecting life's scale. He considered his own mortality, hope mingling with grief, as nature's cycles mirrored human experience. Robert bent to pick up a stone, cold and smooth, holding it like a link to past. Sunlight faded slowly, painting forest with golden hues, shadows lengthening with day's progression. He listened to distant train whistles, blending memory and reality, journeys past, present, and future. Robert approached an old log cabin site, imagining laughter, love, and lives lived within its walls. The forest's quiet song accompanied him, grounding thought, patience, and reflection in every careful step. He paused to rest, breathing in pine-scented air, feeling time's flow and quiet forest rhythm. Robert straightened, determination in each step, weaving memory, labor, and hope into motion forward. Shadows deepened, yet the forest's persistence inspired continued walking, work, and patient rebuilding. He knelt by river, watching reflections ripple, thoughts of Kate and Gladys merging with present life. Robert hummed a remembered melody, carrying it softly through trees, connecting generations and moments. Walking onward, he embraced solitude, nature's lessons, and the quiet wisdom born from long years. Sunlight dimmed further, yet Robert pressed forward, forest guiding, memory fueling, hope sustaining him. Robert walked along the forest edge, sunlight breaking through the treetops in gentle beams. He reflected on past seasons, each log cut, each journey, each fleeting human connection remembered. The scent of pine and damp earth mingled, grounding him in both memory and present. Robert noticed a fox darting through underbrush, its cautious movements blending seamlessly with the shadows. He thought of Arn peoples, the lessons learned, courage and skill shared amidst harsh labor. The river gurgled nearby, its constant flow mirroring the slow passage of years in his life. Robert paused to examine a carved tree, initials faded, echoes of people long gone. Birdsong filled the air, each note weaving through memory, loss, and small joys experienced. He stooped to pick up a fallen pin cone, marveling at nature's delicate yet resilient design. Robert's thoughts returned to Gladys, her laughter, warmth, and the home they once shared. He walked along a narrow path, noticing small wildflowers peeking through moss and leaves. The wind rustled branches above, whispering stories of past work, loss, and enduring patience. Robert considered his mortality, time's passage, and the memories embedded in each tree and stone. He crouched to examine animal tracks in the mud, tracing their silent journeys through the forest. The distant whistle of a train echoed, stirring memories of childhood and long-forgotten travels. Robert paused at a small creek, running fingers through the cool, clear water, contemplating life. Thoughts of Claire Thompson surfaced, her encouragement, and how it quietly strengthened his resolve. Sunlight shifted across the forest floor, illuminating roots and rocks in intricate patterns. He noticed old logging tools abandoned nearby, remnants of human labor long since ended. Robert bent to pick up a smooth stone, grounding himself, connecting past and present sensations. Birds fluttered above, shadows dancing as light filtered through the canopy in dappled streams. He imagined rebuilding the cabin, hearth warm, life renewed, and memories kept alive within. The wind carried scents of pine, resin, and earth, each inhalation anchoring him in the now. Robert reflected on tragedies witnessed: Fu Sheng, thrown from the bridge, and lessons learned silently. He knelt to examine moss and lichen, marveling at survival, growth, and quiet resilience. Footsteps crunched on leaves as he walked, steady, deliberate, threading past memories with present motion. Robert's mind wandered to Kate, imagining her small hand in his during forest walks. Sunlight shifted again, shadows lengthening, marking time's passage across tree trunks and forest floor. He paused by a fallen tree, imagining life, growth, and the cycles of endurance it represented. Robert picked up a twig, examining its structure, connecting it to past labor and forest rhythms. The river gurgled alongside him, whispers of time, change, and continuity flowing endlessly forward. Birdsong mingled with the wind, creating an unseen melody, echoing human and natural experiences. Robert straightened, taking in the vastness of forest, mountains, and distant river valleys. He considered his own journey, the years of work, love, and reflection guiding each careful step. A hawk soared overhead, silent observer, circling through sunlit sky, echoing Robert's own endurance. Robert paused atop a small rise, viewing forests, rivers, and distant trails etched into memory. The forest offered solace, grounding, and quiet understanding of time's flow, life's impermanence. He collected fallen branches, planning firewood, comfort, and continuity for the home he imagined. Robert reflected on human struggle, mortality, and nature's silent guidance through years of labor. Sunlight faded slowly, painting the forest golden, shadows stretching, marking progression of the day. He knelt by a stream, feeling water over hands, reflecting on lost years and moments regained. Robert hummed a remembered melody, carrying through forest, linking past and present with each note. He pressed onward, embracing solitude, patience, memory, and nature's quiet teachings on endurance. The forest's rhythm guided his movements, each step deliberate, echoing decades of labor and thought. Robert observed wildflowers clinging to life in shaded areas, resilience in fragile forms inspiring him. Sunlight dimmed further, yet he continued, forest guiding, memories fueling, hope sustaining each step. Shadows deepened, but determination remained, walking slowly, carefully, with thoughts of home and loved ones. Robert paused briefly to watch a deer cross a clearing, silent witness to the forest's persistence. He took a deep breath, absorbing pine scent, moss, and quiet river sounds, grounding present reflection. The distant train whistle reminded him of journeys past, family, labor, and fleeting human connections. Robert continued through underbrush, noting tracks, fallen branches, and nature's endurance against time. Sunlight waned, shadows lengthened, yet he pressed on, guided by memory, forest, and quiet resolve. Robert returned home as twilight settled, the sky painted with soft violet and gold hues. He lit the lantern, its warm glow filling the cabin with gentle comfort and calm. The wooden walls held memories, echoes of laughter, sorrow, and countless quiet evenings past. Robert sat by the hearth, listening to the wind brush against the cabin's weathered boards. He stirred the fire slowly, watching sparks rise and fade into the dim evening air. Thoughts of Gladys surfaced, her voice, her warmth, her steady presence beside him always. He remembered Kate's laughter, small footsteps echoing through the cabin on brighter days. The creaking floorboards reminded him of time's passage, each sound marking another year lived. Robert opened a small box, revealing keepsakes carefully preserved from earlier, happier years. He held a faded ribbon, fingers tracing its edges, remembering its origin and meaning. The smell of burning wood, mixed with pine resin, grounding him in the present moment. He poured water from a kettle, steam rising, carrying warmth into the cool night air. Robert gazed through the window, moonlight reflecting softly on the river beyond the trees. The forest stood silent, vast and endless, sheltering countless stories within its dark depths. He whispered Gladys's name, letting it drift softly into the quiet night. Memories of shared meals, quiet talks, and simple joys returned with tender clarity. Robert felt gratitude for those years, even knowing their ending carried immeasurable sorrow. He sipped his drink slowly, savoring warmth, comfort, and the small peace it offered. The fire crackled steadily, its rhythm soothing, like a heartbeat within the cabin walls. He leaned back in his chair, allowing thoughts to drift freely through his mind. Robert remembered the days of labor, sweat, and struggle shaping his strong, weathered hands. He examined his palms, lines etched deep, marking decades of work and survival. The cabin felt alive with memories, each beam and plank holding silent witness. Robert stood and stretched, feeling stiffness in his joints, reminders of years passing steadily. He walked to the door, opening it slightly to breathe in cool night air. Stars glittered overhead, countless points of light scattered across the vast dark sky. He closed his eyes, listening to distant owls and the river's steady murmur. Robert felt both alone and accompanied, surrounded by memory and the natural world. He returned inside, securing the door, preserving warmth against the encroaching cold. The lantern flickered softly, casting moving shadows across the cabin's interior walls. He adjusted the blanket on his bed, preparing for another quiet, solitary night. Thoughts of Claire returned, her kind words and gentle encouragement lingering in his mind. Robert felt thankful for her presence, even brief, bringing light into his solitude. He lay down slowly, joints aching, body tired, mind still wandering through memory. The fire's glow dimmed, yet its warmth continued to radiate through the room. Robert closed his eyes, imagining Gladys and Kate watching over him from somewhere unseen. He felt a strange comfort in that thought, easing loneliness and lingering grief. Outside, the wind moved through trees, whispering secrets only the forest could understand. Robert drifted between wakefulness and sleep, thoughts weaving through past and present. He dreamed of walking through fields with Gladys, sunlight warm on their faces. Kate ran ahead, laughing, calling for him to follow her playful steps. In his dream, the cabin stood whole, untouched by fire, filled with life again. Robert felt happiness swell, heart light, spirit free from sorrow's heavy weight. He reached out in the dream, touching their hands, feeling warmth and love. The scene faded gently, dissolving into soft light and distant forest sounds. Robert stirred slightly, still asleep, breathing slow, body resting deeply at last. Moonlight filtered through the window, casting pale shapes across the cabin floor. The fire reduced to glowing embers, still offering gentle warmth through the night. Robert's face relaxed, lines of worry softened, replaced by calm and peace. Outside, the forest remained vigilant, silent guardian of countless human stories and dreams. The river flowed endlessly, indifferent to sorrow, joy, and passing human lives. Robert slept on, held between memory and rest, comforted by dreams and silence. Morning light filtered softly through the cabin window, waking Robert with gentle warmth. He opened his eyes slowly, adjusting to the glow spreading across wooden walls. Robert sat up carefully, joints stiff, body heavy with another night's restless sleep. The floor creaked beneath his feet, familiar sounds greeting him like old companions. Robert moved to the window, peering outside at the quiet forest awakening slowly. Birdsong floated through the air, soft and hopeful, signaling the start of another day. He opened the door, letting crisp morning air wash over his tired face. The scent of damp earth and pine needles filled his lungs with refreshing clarity. Robert stepped outside, boots crunching softly against frost-kissed ground beneath his feet. He stretched his arms skyward, feeling muscles awaken after long hours of stillness. Sunlight brushed the treetops, casting long golden shadows across the forest floor. Robert closed his eyes, savoring the quiet beauty surrounding his small, lonely cabin. He whispered a soft greeting to the day, voice barely louder than the wind. Walking toward the river, he followed a narrow path carved by years of use. The ground felt cold and firm, reminding him of the world's steady persistence. He paused by the water's edge, watching ripples dance across its mirrored surface. Robert knelt, dipping his hands into the icy water, feeling its sharp, cleansing chill. He splashed his face gently, washing away remnants of sleep and lingering dreams. Droplets slid down his cheeks, sparkling briefly in the rising sunlight. He stood, breathing deeply, feeling refreshed, though weariness still clung to his bones. Turning back toward the cabin, he noticed smoke rising faintly in the distance. At first, he thought it was morning mist, drifting lazily through the trees. Robert narrowed his eyes, focusing on the distant plume curling upward beyond the forest. He felt a tightening in his stomach, a warning stirring from long experience. Without hesitation, he turned and hurried back toward the cabin, pace quickening steadily. His boots struck the ground harder now, urgency driving each step forward. The forest seemed suddenly closer, shadows heavier, sounds sharper in the morning stillness. Robert reached the cabin, grabbed his pack, and quickly checked its contents. He secured food, water, and a blanket, preparing for whatever lay ahead. Another glance at the smoke confirmed it was not fading but growing stronger. Then he noticed movement near the edge of the clearing, barely visible through smoke. Robert shouted, his voice cutting through the roar of flames and forest silence. He rushed forward, pulling the figure away from the burning structure's collapsing edge. The person fell into his arms, trembling, coughing violently from smoke inhalation. Robert dragged them farther from the fire, toward safety among the trees. The figure was a woman, face streaked with soot, eyes wide with shock. She clutched his arm tightly, knuckles white, fear written across her features. "Are you hurt?" Robert asked, voice steady despite the chaos surrounding them. She shook her head weakly, coughing again, tears mixing with ash on her cheeks. Robert placed his coat around her shoulders, shielding her from the cold and heat. He guided her farther away, ensuring they were safely beyond the fire's reach. Together, they watched the flames consume what remained of her small cabin. The woman cried quietly, shoulders shaking, grief and shock overwhelming her completely. Robert stood beside her, silent, understanding her loss all too well. He remembered his own fire, the helplessness, the sudden destruction of everything familiar. Placing a steady hand on her back, he offered silent comfort and presence. Minutes passed as the fire burned itself out, leaving only charred remains behind. Smoke thinned gradually, drifting upward and dispersing into the pale morning sky. The woman wiped her eyes, breathing slowly, trying to steady herself after the ordeal. "My name is Claire," she said softly, voice still trembling with exhaustion. They stood together, facing the blackened ruins of what had once been her home. Claire stared at the ashes, eyes distant, processing the sudden loss and shock. "I had just stepped outside," she whispered, "when I saw the flames." Robert listened carefully, letting her speak without interruption or judgment. "I tried to go back in," she continued, voice breaking, "but the heat stopped me." He nodded, understanding her guilt, though he knew she had done all she could. Claire looked up at him, eyes glistening, gratitude mixed with sorrow and disbelief. "I don't know what I would have done without you," she said quietly. Robert offered a faint smile, one that carried both kindness and shared pain. "You're not alone," he replied, voice firm yet compassionate. Birdsong had faded, replaced by crackling embers and the soft rustle of wind. Robert glanced around, assessing their surroundings and planning their next steps. "My cabin isn't far," he said. "You can stay there until you recover." Claire hesitated briefly, then nodded, exhaustion evident in her posture and expression. They moved slowly, each step deliberate, navigating uneven ground through the forest path. The scent of smoke lingered on their clothes, a reminder of what had been lost. Neither spoke much as they walked, silence heavy but not uncomfortable between them. Robert focused on guiding her safely, while Claire stared ahead, lost in thought. The forest seemed different now, shadows deeper, light softer, air heavier with meaning. "It keeps moving," she said softly, "no matter what happens to us." Robert nodded, appreciating the quiet truth in her observation. "Yes," he said, "it reminds us that life continues, even after loss." They crossed the riverbank carefully, stepping over rocks and fallen branches. Soon, the cabin came into view, standing peacefully among tall, sheltering trees. Claire looked at it with relief, her shoulders relaxing slightly at the sight. Robert opened the door, ushering her inside, offering warmth and safety. The familiar scent of wood and smoke greeted them, comforting and steady. He helped her sit near the hearth, preparing to rekindle the fire. As flames flickered back to life, warmth filled the room, easing the cold. Claire wrapped herself in the blanket he offered, trembling slowly subsiding. Robert poured her water, then tea, encouraging her to drink and rest. She accepted gratefully, hands shaking as she lifted the cup to her lips. The cabin felt different now, no longer entirely empty or silent. Another presence filled the space, bringing both weight and quiet companionship. Robert sat across from her, watching carefully, ready to help if needed. Claire stared into the fire, eyes reflecting dancing flames and hidden emotions. "I don't know where I'll go now," she said quietly, voiced uncertain. Robert considered her words, feeling a sense of responsibility stir within him. "You can stay here," he said, "for as long as you need." She looked up, surprised, then softened, gratitude washing over her tired face. "Thank you," she whispered, voice filled with relief and appreciation. They sat together in silence, the fire crackling softly between them. Outside, the forest resumed its gentle rhythm, birdsong slowly returning. Robert felt something shift inside him, a subtle change he couldn't yet name. The cabin, once a place of solitude, now held shared space and purpose. Claire's presence brought both reminders of pain and new possibilities. Robert gazed at the flames, reflecting on how quickly life could change direction. Loss had brought them together, yet perhaps healing could grow from shared understanding. He felt a quiet resolve forming, though he didn't fully understand it yet. For now, all that mattered was offering shelter, warmth, and compassion. The forest outside remained vast and uncertain, but the cabin felt safe and steady. Robert leaned back slightly, allowing himself to breathe more freely than before. Claire closed her eyes briefly, exhaustion finally overtaking shock and adrenaline. The fire's warmth surrounded them both, steady and comforting in the quiet cabin. Two lives, shaped by loss, now shared the same space and uncertain future. Outside, the wind whispered through trees, carrying away smoke and lingering sorrow. Inside, something new quietly began, born from ashes, pain, and unexpected connection. Morning came quietly, light slipping through narrow gaps between tall forest trees. Robert awoke first, listening to the steady rhythm of Claire's slow breathing. The fire had burned low, leaving glowing embers beneath soft gray ash. Robert stirred the coals gently, coaxing new flames into the quiet hearth. He stepped outside, letting crisp air clear the heaviness from his chest. The forest greeted him with birdsong and faint rustling among distant leaves. Robert stood still, breathing deeply, feeling both tired and strangely renewed. The smell of boiling water and bread slowly filled the cabin. Claire stirred slightly, shifting beneath the blanket, eyes still closed. Robert poured tea and placed a cup beside her on the small table. "Good morning," he said gently, voice steady and calm. She nodded faintly, a tired smile touching her lips. "Thank you for letting me stay," she said quietly. Robert nodded. "You're welcome. You needed rest after yesterday." Robert considered her words, feeling familiar weight in her uncertainty. "Sometimes," he said, "we take things one day at a time." She nodded, eyes thoughtful, staring into the flames before them. "I had plans," she murmured, "but now everything feels uncertain." He leaned back slightly, gazing at the cabin walls, worn but sturdy. "This place wasn't built from perfect plans," he said quietly. "It was built from what I had, when I had nothing else." "You built this yourself?" she asked, voice filled with quiet admiration. Robert nodded slowly, remembering the long days of cutting and hauling wood. "Yes," he replied. "After the fire, I needed somewhere to start again." "I'm sorry," she said gently, recognizing the pain behind his calm tone. Robert nodded once, appreciating her compassion, though words felt unnecessary. Robert followed, watching her take slow steps toward the riverbank. "It's strange," she said, "how something beautiful can feel so painful." "The river reminds me that everything keeps moving," he replied, "even when we wish time would slow or stop." "I worked for the Forest Service," she said, breaking the silence. "I traveled often, surveying land, studying trees, mapping wilderness areas." Robert listened closely, intrigued by her work and experiences. "I loved it," she continued, "being out here, surrounded by nature. It made me feel small, but in a comforting way." "That's how the forest makes me feel too," he said quietly. They walked slowly along the riverbank, stepping over rocks and roots. The sunlight filtered through trees, creating patterns across the ground. Claire paused, pointing toward a cluster of young trees near the water. "Those weren't here last time I passed through," she said softly. Robert studied them, nodding. "The forest is always changing, even when we don't notice it happening." Claire looked thoughtful, then sighed deeply, shoulders rising and falling slowly. "I don't know if I can go back to my old life," she admitted. Robert considered her words carefully before responding. "Maybe," he said. "You don't need to go back. Maybe there's something new waiting, even if you can't see it yet." Claire looked at him, eyes searching his face for meaning and reassurance. "That sounds hopeful," she said quietly, "but also frightening." Robert nodded, understanding her hesitation and fear. "Change often feels that way," he replied. "But sometimes, it leads us exactly where we need to be." They returned to the cabin, carrying both uncertainty and subtle hope between them. Inside, the fire continued burning steadily, warmth filling the wooden space. Claire sat at the small table, staring at the rough wood grain thoughtfully. Robert began preparing another simple meal, moving with quiet familiarity. The cabin felt less lonely now, filled with soft conversation and shared presence. After eating, Claire stood and walked slowly around the room. She examined the shelves, the tools, the simple furniture Robert had built. "You've made something lasting here," she said softly. Robert shrugged slightly. "It's simple, but it's enough." Claire smiled faintly, appreciating his humility and quiet strength. She stopped by the window, gazing outside at the forest canopy. "I've always studied trees," she said, "but never lived among them like this." Robert nodded, understanding the difference between observing and truly belonging. "It's different when you stay," he said. "You start to feel part of the land, not just a visitor." Claire turned toward him, eyes reflecting both curiosity and longing. "I think I want that," she admitted quietly. "You're welcome to stay," he said again, voice sincere and steady. "For as long as you want or need." Claire smiled more fully now, relief and gratitude washing over her face. "Thank you," she said, voice filled with genuine appreciation. They spent the afternoon quietly, working side by side around the cabin. The forest outside hummed softly, wind rustling leaves high above. Time passed slowly, peacefully, marked only by shifting sunlight and shadows. They stepped outside together, watching the sun sink behind distant mountains. The air cooled, carrying the scent of pine and fresh earth. Robert offered his coat, draping it gently over her shoulders. She accepted, eyes meeting his briefly, gratitude clear and unspoken. They stood in silence, watching colors fade from the sky. The forest grew darker, shadows stretching across the ground. Claire gazed upward, eyes wide, filled with wonder and quiet awe. "I've forgotten how beautiful this is," she whispered softly. Robert followed her gaze, remembering nights spent alone under the same sky. "Yes," he said quietly, "it never really changes." They returned inside as night fully settled, bringing cool air and stillness. The fire was rekindled, filling the cabin with gentle warmth once more. Claire sat near the hearth, watching flames dance across the stone. I lost someone too, Claire said suddenly, breaking the silence. Robert looked up, attentive, his expression calm and open. My husband, she continued, voice soft. He was sick for a long time. Robert listened carefully, offering quiet space for her words. He died last year, she said, eyes lowering, voice trembling slightly. I thought staying busy would keep the pain away, but it always finds a way back. Robert nodded, understanding her grief all too well. But it doesn't have to leave us empty forever. I don't know how to move forward, she admitted quietly. Sometimes, he said, we move forward by standing still, by letting ourselves feel, instead of running from it. Claire closed her eyes briefly, breathing deeply, absorbing his words. I've been running, she admitted softly. Maybe this fire stopped me for a reason. Maybe, he said. It brought you here instead. Outside, the forest rested beneath a blanket of darkness and starlight. Inside, two people shared grief, hope, and quiet understanding. Time seemed to slow, each moment stretching gently into the next. Claire leaned back slightly, feeling calmer than she had in a long time. It wasn't happiness exactly, but something close, something steady and warm. The cabin no longer felt like a place of isolation. It felt like the beginning of something new, though uncertain and fragile. Outside, wind whispered through trees, carrying stories of past and future alike. Inside, two lives slowly found comfort in shared silence and fragile hope. The next morning arrived softly, wrapped in pale light and gentle birdsong. Robert woke before dawn, listening to the forest breathing round the cabin. Claire still slept, her breathing slow, steady, and finally peaceful. He stepped outside quietly, letting cool air wash over his tired thoughts. Mist hung low above the river, drifting like quiet memories across water. Robert stood still, feeling the earth beneath his boots, grounding him again. He returned inside, starting the fire, its warmth slowly filling the room. The crackling wood felt familiar, comforting, like an old companion. Claire stirred soon after, stretching slightly before opening her eyes. Good morning, she said softly, voice still wrapped in sleep. Robert smiled faintly. Morning. The day's already moving. She sat up slowly, wrapping the blanket tighter around her shoulders. The firelight reflected gently across her face, softening tired lines. Robert prepared tea, placing a cup beside her on the small table. She thanked him quietly, sipping slowly, letting warmth settle inside. They sat in comfortable silence, listening to wood pop within the hearth. Outside, the forest awakened, leaves rustling with the first breath of wind. Claire gazed toward the window, eyes lingering on the moving branches. I used to wake in cities, she said quietly. Sirens, traffic, voices echoing through streets and halls. Robert listened, imagining that distant, crowded world. This feels different, she continued, like waking inside a living painting. Robert nodded, understanding her meaning without needing more words. The forest changes every morning, he said softly, but it always feels the same at heart. Claire smiled faintly, appreciating the simple truth in his words. After breakfast, they stepped outside together, breathing in cool morning air. Sunlight filtered through tall pines, creating patterns across forest floor. They walked slowly along the riverbank, letting silence guide their steps. Claire watched the water closely, fascinated by its steady movement. It never stops, she said softly, even when everything else feels frozen or broken. Robert nodded, eyes following the current. That's what I admire about it, he replied. It reminds me that life keeps going, even when we struggle. They continued walking, stepping carefully over stones and exposed roots. Birds darted overhead, wings slicing through cool air. Claire paused, touching the bark of a nearby tree. This one's old, she said thoughtfully. You can see it in the scars and knots. Robert examined the tree, recognizing the marks of time and survival. Yes, he said quietly. It's lived through storms we never saw. Claire looked thoughtful, tracing the rough surface with her fingers. Do you think trees remember? She asked softly. Robert considered her question, gazing at the towering trunk. I think they carry history, he said. Not in words, but in their growth and wounds. Claire nodded slowly, absorbing his answer. That makes sense, she replied. They hold what they've survived, even if they keep growing. They walked back toward the cabin, footsteps slow and unhurried. The forest felt calm, as though listening to their quiet conversation. Inside, Robert gathered tools, preparing to repair part of the roof. The storm from days earlier had loosened a few shingles. Claire watched him, curiosity growing in her eyes. Can I help? She asked gently. Robert paused, surprised but appreciative of her offer. Of course, he said, handing her a small tool. They worked side by side, climbing carefully, moving slowly and steadily. The roof creaked beneath their weight, but held firm. Claire focused intently, adjusting shingles as Robert guided her. "I've never done anything like this," she said quietly. Robert smiled faintly. "You're doing well." She returned the smile, encouraged by his calm assurance. Working together felt natural, comfortable, like a rhythm forming between them. The sky above remained clear, sunlight warming their backs gently. When they finished, they climbed down carefully, standing on solid ground again. Claire brushed dust from her hands, breathing deeply, feeling accomplished. "That felt good," she said softly. Robert nodded, sharing her quiet satisfaction. "Simple work can be grounding," he replied. "It reminds us we can still build, still fix things." They sat on the cabin steps, resting, watching clouds drift slowly overhead. The world felt quiet, peaceful, as though time had slowed. Claire leaned back, closing her eyes briefly, enjoying the moment. "I haven't felt this calm in a long time," she admitted softly. Robert listened, understanding how rare such calm can be. "Sometimes," he said, "we forget how much we need stillness." Claire nodded, eyes still closed, breathing steady and slow. "I think I've been afraid of stillness," she said quietly. "When everything stops, the memories feel louder." Robert considered her words carefully before responding. "That's true," he said gently. "But sometimes, stillness lets us face what we've been avoiding." Claire opened her eyes, looking at him with thoughtful expression. "Maybe that's why I needed to be here," she said. Robert nodded slowly, feeling the weight and truth of her statement. As the afternoon arrived, clouds gathered lightly, shading the forest floor. The air grew cooler, carrying a hint of rain. Claire watched the sky, sensing the shift in weather. "Do storms bother you?" she asked quietly. Robert considered the question, memories stirring within him. "They used to," he admitted. After the fire, every storm felt like a threat. Claire looked at him, eyes filled with understanding. "But now?" she asked softly. Robert gazed at the darkening clouds, calm and steady. "Now," he said, "they remind me that everything changes, and that change doesn't always mean destruction." Claire nodded, absorbing his words carefully. "That's comforting," she said. "Change has always scared me." Robert smiled faintly, recognizing that fear well. "It scares most people," he replied. "But sometimes, it leads us somewhere better." The first drops of rain fell lightly, tapping softly against the roof. They moved inside, closing the door gently behind them. Rain increased steadily, drumming rhythmically against wood and stone. Claire sat near the window, watching raindrops slide down glass. "I love the sound of rain," she said quietly. "It feels like the world taking a deep breath." Robert nodded, listening to the steady rhythm outside. "Yes," he said, "it washes things clean." They sat together, listening to rain, fire crackling softly nearby. The cabin felt warm, safe, sheltered from the storm outside. Claire turned toward Robert, expression thoughtful, almost hesitant. "I've been thinking," she said softly, "about what comes next for me." Robert listened, attentive, open to her words. "I don't want to go back to running," she continued. "I want to stay somewhere long enough to feel rooted." Robert considered her words, heart stirring quietly. "You're welcome here," he said again, voice sincere. "For as long as you need or choose." Claire smiled gently, relief and gratitude reflected in her eyes. "Thank you," she said quietly. They sat in silence again, rain continuing its steady song outside. Time seemed to blur, moments flowing into one another gently. Claire leaned back slightly, resting against the cabin wall. Robert watched the fire, feeling warmth spread through his chest. He realized he no longer felt entirely alone in this place. The cabin no longer echoed with only his thoughts and memories. It now held shared conversations, shared silence, shared moments. Outside, the rain slowed gradually, clouds thinning across the sky. Light returned softly, illuminating forest leaves with fresh brightness. Claire stood, opening the door, letting cool air enter the cabin. The forest smelled clean, renewed, as if freshly awakened. Robert stepped outside beside her, breathing deeply, feeling lighter. Claire smiled softly, eyes scanning the refreshed landscape. "It feels like a new beginning," she said quietly. Robert nodded, feeling the truth in her words. "Yes," he replied. "Sometimes rain brings more than just water." They stood together, watching the forest recover from the storm. Birds emerged again, their calls echoing softly through the trees. Life resumed its gentle rhythm, steady and reassuring. Claire turned toward Robert, expression calm, hopeful, open. "I'm glad I came here," she said sincerely. Robert met her gaze, feeling something warm and steady within. So am I, he replied quietly. They stood side by side, sharing a quiet understanding of this moment. The next few days passed gently, measured by light and quiet routine. Robert rose early each morning, the forest greeting him with birdsong. Claire often joined him, wrapped in a blanket, watching dawn unfold. They spoke little during those moments, letting silence guide their thoughts. Breakfasts were simple, shared at the small wooden table near the window. Steam rose from their cups, mingling with the cool morning air. Afterward, Robert tended the cabin, checking beams, tightening loose boards. Claire explored nearby trails, returning with stories of streams and mossy stones. Sometimes she brought wildflowers, placing them gently on the table. Their colors softened the room, adding warmth to the cabin's quiet corners. One afternoon, Claire returned with a small notebook in her hand. "I've started writing again," she said softly, eyes thoughtful. Robert looked at the notebook, surprised but quietly pleased. "That's good," he said. "It helps to let thoughts find a place to rest." Claire nodded, sitting by the fire, flipping through blank pages. "I used to write every day," she admitted quietly. "Then life became loud, and I forgot how." Robert understood, remembering how grief had once silenced his own inner voice. "Sometimes," he said, "quiet helps us remember who we were." Claire smiled faintly, appreciating his words. Later that evening, rain returned briefly, tapping gently against the roof. They sat together, listening, letting the rhythm fill the room. Claire wrote in her notebook while Robert carved small wooden pieces nearby. Neither spoke, yet neither felt alone. The silence between them felt comfortable, shared, meaningful. Over time, Claire began helping more around the cabin. She swept floors, gathered firewood, and learned to mend torn fabric. Robert showed her how to stack logs properly, ensuring dry wood for winter. She listened carefully, asking thoughtful questions, eager to learn. He admired her patience, her quiet determination to grow, rooted here. One afternoon, Robert decided to show Claire a place near the ridge. "It's quiet up there," he said. "And the view is something special." They packed a small meal and began the slow climb through forest paths. The trail wound between tall trees, sunlight filtering through dense branches. Claire walked carefully, steadying herself over uneven ground. Robert stayed close, guiding her gently when needed. As they climbed higher, the forest thinned, revealing open sky. The ridge appeared suddenly, stretching wide beneath endless clouds. Claire stopped, breath catching softly at the sight before her. "It's beautiful," she whispered. Robert smiled faintly, pleased she felt what he always had there. They sat on a flat stone, overlooking the valley below. The river shimmered in the distance, winding through forest and field. Claire took out her notebook, sketching the view carefully. Robert watched her, impressed by her attention to detail. "I used to sketch landscapes," she said softly. "Before everything changed." Robert nodded, understanding that familiar sense of before and after. "Some things return," he said. "Not the same, but close enough." Claire smiled faintly, continuing to draw. They ate quietly, sharing bread, cheese, and apples. The wind brushed gently across the ridge, cool and refreshing. Claire closed her eyes briefly, breathing deeply, absorbing the moment. "I feel lighter here," she said softly, "as if the weight isn't pressing so hard." Robert nodded, feeling the same calm settle within him. "Yes," he said. "Some places help us breathe again." They remained there for some time, letting the view sink into memory. Eventually, they began the slow walk back toward the cabin. The path felt familiar now, no longer strange or uncertain. Claire walked with more confidence, stepping carefully, but without hesitation. Robert noticed the change, feeling quietly proud. Back at the cabin, evening light painted the walls with golden warmth. Claire set her notebook aside, helping Robert prepare dinner. They worked side by side, chopping vegetables, stirring soup. The simple task felt meaningful, grounding, shared. Dinner was warm and filling, eaten slowly, with occasional smiles. Afterward, they sat near the fire, letting warmth ease tired muscles. Claire leaned back, gaze thoughtful, voice gentle. "Do you ever think about leaving here?" she asked. Robert considered the question carefully before answering. "Sometimes," he admitted, "but not in the way I used to." Claire looked at him, curious. "I once thought I needed to escape this place," he continued. "To run from memories that hurt too much." Claire listened, her expression soft, understanding. "But now," Robert said quietly, "I see this place holds not just pain, but life. Not just loss, but what remains." Claire nodded slowly, absorbing his words. "That makes sense," she said. Maybe places don't trap us. Maybe we trap ourselves. Robert smiled faintly at her insight. Yes, he replied. Sometimes, we build the walls inside our own minds. The fire crackled softly, casting dancing shadows across the walls. Claire stared into the flames, eyes reflecting their warm glow. I don't want to keep running, she said quietly. I want to learn how to stay. Robert looked at her, feeling a quiet respect grow. That takes courage, he said. Staying can be harder than leaving. Claire smiled faintly, appreciating his honesty. I think I'm finally ready to try, she said. The days that followed continued in quiet rhythm. Claire settled into life at the cabin more fully. She helped with chores, explored the forest, wrote daily. Robert noticed her laughter returning, light and unexpected. He found himself smiling more often, feeling less weighed down. One evening, Claire returned from a walk, looking thoughtful. I saw something today, she said softly. Robert looked up, curious. There was a young deer near the stream, she continued. It was injured, struggling to stand. Robert felt concern rise within him. Did you help it? He asked. Claire nodded. I couldn't leave it there, she said. I stayed nearby, hoping its mother would return. Robert listened carefully, heart warmed by her compassion. She did, Claire continued. The mother appeared quietly, guiding it back into the trees. Robert smiled faintly, feeling the beauty of that moment. That's the forest, he said. Life carrying on, even when fragile. Claire nodded, thoughtful. It reminded me how fragile we all are, she said, and how much we need each other. Robert felt the truth of her words, settled deeply. Yes, he replied softly. We're not meant to survive alone. That night, Claire wrote for hours, her pen moving steadily across pages. Robert watched her quietly, feeling grateful for her presence. The cabin felt less empty, less haunted by old echoes. It now held new memories, new voices, new warmth. Robert realized he was no longer just surviving here. He was living again, in quiet, meaningful ways. Claire eventually set her notebook aside, looking tired but peaceful. I wrote about the deer, she said softly. And about this place. Robert smiled faintly. I'm glad, he said. Some stories deserve to be remembered. They sat together in comfortable silence, fire crackling softly nearby. Outside, the forest rested beneath the night sky, calm and steady. Stars appeared slowly, scattered across darkness like distant promises. Claire gazed out the window, eyes reflecting their gentle glow. I feel like I'm finding myself again, she said quietly. Robert looked at her, heart warm, voice steady. I think you already have, he replied. And maybe, he added, we're both finding something we thought was lost. Claire smiled softly, turning toward him. Maybe, she said. The night settled around them, quiet and full of possibility. The next morning arrived, with a thin mist clinging to the forest floor. Robert stepped outside, breathing in the cool, damp air deeply. The trees stood still, wrapped in pale fog like quiet guardians. Inside, Claire stirred, stretching slowly beneath her blanket. She joined Robert on the porch, wrapped in a sweater against the chill. Morning feels different here, she said softly. It always does, Robert replied. Like the world pauses just long enough to breathe. They stood together, watching fog drift between trunks like slow-moving ghosts. Birds began calling from unseen branches, their songs gentle and distant. Claire closed her eyes briefly, listening carefully. It sounds like the forest is waking up, she said. Yes, Robert replied, and reminding us that we're part of it. After breakfast, Robert decided to check the old trail beyond the creek. It hasn't been used in years, he explained. But sometimes paths return, even after being forgotten. Claire agreed, eager to explore something new. They crossed the creek carefully, stepping across smooth stones. The water moved quietly beneath them, clear and cold. Beyond the creek, the forest felt thicker, older, less touched. Moss covered fallen logs, and ferns grew tall in shaded patches. Claire walked slowly, touching leaves, studying shapes and colors. This place feels ancient, she whispered. Robert nodded. Some parts of the forest never forget, he said. They remember everything. As they followed the faint trail, Robert noticed signs of wildlife. Deer tracks marked a soft earth near the stream. Bird feathers lay scattered beneath tall pines. Claire pointed out small burrows near the base of trees. It feels alive, she said softly. Robert smiled faintly. It always has been, he replied. Sometimes we just forget how to see it. They eventually reached a small clearing, open and quiet. Sunlight filtered through tall trees, creating a soft golden pool. In the center, an old stump stood, worn smooth by time. Robert remembered standing there years ago, alone and uncertain. Now, he stood beside Claire, feeling the difference. "This place," he said quietly. "I once came here when I didn't know where else to go." Claire looked at him, attentive, gentle. "Did it help?" she asked. Robert thought for a moment. "It didn't solve anything," he said. "But it reminded me that I was still here." Claire nodded, understanding that kind of comfort. They sat on the stump, sharing quiet reflection. The forest around them seemed to hold its breath. After a while, Claire pulled out her notebook again. "I want to write about this place," she said softly. "About how it feels to stand where someone once stood alone." Robert smiled faintly. "That sounds worth remembering," he replied. She wrote quietly, her pen moving steadily across the page. Robert watched, feeling grateful for her presence. Eventually, they returned toward the cabin as afternoon approached. Clouds gathered slowly, darkening the sky with promise of rain. The air grew cooler, carrying the scent of wet earth. They reached the cabin just as the first drops fell. Rain soon followed in steady rhythm, tapping against roof and leaves. Claire lit the small lamp inside, casting warm light across the room. Robert added wood to the stove, filling the cabin with heat. They settled into chairs near the fire, listening to Rain's soft music. Claire closed her notebook, leaning back, thoughtful. "I've been thinking," she said quietly, "about what comes next." Robert looked at her, attentive. "What do you mean?" he asked. "I don't want to stay forever," she said gently. "But I don't want to rush away either." Robert nodded, understanding the balance she sought. "That makes sense," he replied. "Sometimes staying is part of moving forward." Claire smiled faintly. "I think I need time," she said, "to rebuild myself before stepping into something new." Robert felt respect rise within him for her honesty. "You're allowed that," he said. "No one heals on someone else's schedule." Claire looked relieved, grateful for his support. Rain continued falling, steady and soothing. They spoke quietly about small things, books, memories, dreams. Claire shared stories of her childhood near the coast. Robert spoke of long winters, endless forests, quiet nights alone. Their words wove together, forming something warm and meaningful. As evening arrived, the rain slowly eased. The sky lightened, revealing soft clouds drifting apart. Claire stepped outside briefly, breathing in fresh air. The forest glistened, leaves heavy with water, ground dark and rich. She returned inside, cheeks flushed from cool air. "It smelled like new beginnings," she said softly. Robert smiled faintly. "Yes," he replied. "Rain often feels like a reset." That night, Claire dreamed of walking through endless fields of grass. She saw herself younger, lighter, free from grief's weight. When she awoke, she felt calm, hopeful. Morning light filtered through the window, gentle and warm. Robert was already awake, preparing breakfast quietly. "Did you sleep well?" he asked. After breakfast, Claire suggested cleaning the old shed behind the cabin. "It's been untouched for years," she said. "Maybe there's something useful inside." Robert agreed, curious about what might remain there. They walked to the shed, opening the creaking door carefully. Dust drifted through sunlight, illuminating forgotten tools and boxers. Claire coughed lightly, waving dust away. "This place has history," she said softly. Robert nodded. "So do most places, if we listen closely." They began sorting through old items. Rusted nails, worn ropes, broken lanterns. Claire discovered an old camera inside a small wooden box. "Does this work?" she asked, holding it carefully. Robert examined it, recognizing its shape and weight. "That belonged to Gladys," he said quietly. Claire looked at him, surprised, gentle. "She loved taking pictures," Robert continued softly. "Captured moments she didn't want to forget." Claire felt a wave of emotion, but held the camera respectfully. "It's beautiful," she said. "Do you mind if I try using it?" Robert shook his head gently. "No," he replied. "I think she would have liked that." Claire smiled faintly, feeling honored by his trust. They continued cleaning, stacking useful tools aside. By afternoon, the shed looked clearer, lighter, almost renewed. Claire stepped back, surveying their work with satisfaction. "It feels good to bring life back into forgotten places," she said. Robert nodded, feeling the truth of her words. "Yes," he replied. "Sometimes, that's how we heal ourselves too." They returned to the cabin, tired but content. Claire made tea, while Robert prepared a simple meal. They ate quietly, enjoying the sense of shared accomplishment. Afterward, Claire took the camera outside, practicing with its controls. She photographed the forest, the creek, the cabin, the sky. Robert watched her, feeling a quiet warmth inside. "You have an eye for things," he said softly. Claire smiled faintly. I just see what feels important, she replied. That's the best kind of seeing, Robert said. As evening approached, Claire sat near the window, reviewing her photos. She smiled at the images, feeling connected to the moment. I think I want to remember this time, she said softly. Robert nodded. I think you will, he replied. And maybe, he added, some memories deserve to stay bright. The night arrived gently, without storms or heavy wind. Stars emerged slowly, scattered across the dark sky. Claire and Robert sat on the porch, wrapped in blankets. They watched the sky quietly, listening to forest sounds. I never imagined this chapter of my life, Claire said softly. Neither did I, Robert replied. But sometimes, the unexpected chapters become the most meaningful. Claire smiled, feeling gratitude settle in her chest. Yes, she said. I think you're right. They sat quietly, letting night surround them. The forest breathed around them, calm and steady. Robert felt something unfamiliar, yet comforting. Hope. Claire felt something she hadn't felt in a long time. Belonging. Neither spoke, yet both understood. The moment held no need for words. The morning sun spilled gold across the cabin roof, warming the worn wood. Robert stirred first, stepping outside to greet the new day quietly. The forest shimmered, dew clinging to leaves and grass like tiny jewels. Claire followed, carrying a notebook, ready to capture thoughts and moments. You ever feel like mornings here are alive? She asked softly. Robert nodded, scanning the trees for subtle movements of life. Every morning has its rhythm, he said. And this place sings in its own way. Birdsong echoed faintly through the clearing, gentle and persistent. A cool breeze rustled the branches, carrying scents of pine and wet earth. Claire inhaled deeply, feeling the peace settle in her chest. Sometimes I wish we could bottle this, she said quietly. Robert smiled faintly, understanding the longing in her words. They walked slowly toward the creek, watching water ripple over smooth stones. Robert paused, pointing to small fish darting beneath the surface. They live quietly here, he said. And sometimes quietly means safe. Claire knelt, dipping her hand into the cool, flowing water. It's refreshing, she said, letting her fingers trail along the current. Robert crouched beside her, listening to the gentle flow. Nature has ways of teaching patience, he said softly. Claire smiled, feeling a calm settle in her mind. They returned to the cabin, carrying the quiet energy of the creek. Inside, Claire prepared breakfast while Robert gathered firewood. The cabin filled with the smell of warm bread and brewing coffee. They ate slowly, savoring both the food and the unhurried morning. Conversation drifted lightly, moving from plans to memories of past seasons. Robert spoke of winter storms that had left the cabin buried in snow. Claire laughed softly, imagining him digging paths alone through icy drifts. After breakfast, they decided to repair the small fence around the garden. Wood had warped over the years, nails loose and splintered in places. Robert handed Claire tools, guiding her hands with gentle instructions. They worked side by side, rhythm flowing as naturally as conversation. The sun climbed higher, casting warm light through dusty cabin windows. By noon, the fence stood sturdier, a small accomplishment shared between them. Claire wiped sweat from her brow, smiling faintly at their progress. It's satisfying to fix something neglected, she said. Robert nodded, feeling the same quiet satisfaction within himself. After a brief rest, he suggested a walk through the higher trails nearby. They took a pack with water and light supplies, eager for fresh air. The trail wound upward through dense trees, revealing glimpses of distant mountains. Robert pointed out the path he had once carved alone, many years prior. Claire listened carefully, imagining the solitude he must have felt. They reached a clearing, where sunlight poured through broken canopy gaps. Claire took photographs, capturing patterns of light and shadow on the forest floor. Robert sat on a fallen log, watching her work with quiet admiration. Sometimes the smallest details tell the largest stories, he said. Claire nodded, focusing her lens on a cluster of delicate wildflowers. Time passed unnoticed as they explored, laughter occasionally breaking the silence. Robert shared memories of Arcand peoples, describing his work and humor. Claire listened, feeling connection to a past she never knew firsthand. They moved onward, following the trail until the sun began to lower. Shadows stretched long across the forest, turning trees into tall silhouettes. They decided to return before dusk swallowed the path entirely. Back at the cabin, the air had cooled, crisp with approaching evening. Claire tended a small herb garden near the porch, while Robert repaired tools. The scent of sage and thyme drifted around them, mingling with the forest's aroma. Dinner was simple, shared quietly with soft smiles and comfortable silence. Afterwards, they sat near the stove, listening to the wind through trees. Claire wrote in her notebook, capturing moments of connection and reflection. Robert watched, feeling the weight of years lift gently from his shoulders. As night deepened, stars appeared one by one across the dark sky. Claire stepped outside briefly, taking in the vastness above the forest. Robert joined her, both standing silently beneath endless constellations. "It's humbling," Claire whispered softly. "Yes," Robert agreed. "And comforting to remember we're part of something larger." They returned inside, letting the warmth of the cabin enfold them. Robert added logs to the fire, creating a soft, glowing light. The night was calm, unbroken except for occasional calls of distant owls. They slept peacefully, each aware of the other's presence as a comforting anchor. The dawn arrived quietly, spilling pale light through the cabin's narrow windows. Robert stirred, stretching slowly as the chill of morning crept into the room. Claire joined him with a cup of coffee, steam curling up like soft mist. They stepped outside together, inhaling the crisp air filled with pine scent. The forest was alive, birds singing, leaves trembling with a gentle breeze. Robert led her toward a hidden trail, one he often walked alone before. "The woods have their own rhythm," he said, eyes scanning the tall trees. Claire listened carefully, noticing subtle shifts in light across the mossy ground. They moved in silence, letting the sounds of the forest guide their pace. A distant waterfall echoed through the trees, calling them deeper into nature. Robert paused to point out a carved symbol on an old oak trunk. "Arn left this here, long ago," he whispered, tracing the worn grooves lightly. Claire admired the mark, feeling a tangible connection to the past around them. The trail led to a high ridge, revealing panoramic views of rolling hills. Sunlight poured over valleys, illuminating streams winding like silver threads. They settled on a large rock, letting the scenery soak into their thoughts. Robert spoke of winters long past, when snow would bury the cabin entirely. Claire imagined him navigating frozen forests, carving paths with quiet determination. The wind carried distant scents of smoke, perhaps from a neighbor's hearth. She noted birds soaring above, riding air currents with effortless grace. "Nature teaches patience," Robert said, eyes following a hawk's slow arc. Claire nodded, feeling the lesson echo quietly in her own mind. They lingered, sharing stories and laughter, the ridge their secluded retreat. Time passed slowly, unnoticed, as sun climbed higher, warming their shoulders. Robert pointed to a distant mountain peak, snow clinging stubbornly to rock faces. Claire raised her camera, capturing the intricate patterns of light and shadow. They paused for lunch, simple sandwiches eaten amid the rustling foliage. Conversation drifted to local history, curious legends of early settlers and trains. Robert recounted tales of logging camps, men working tirelessly in harsh conditions. Claire listened intently, fascinated by the personal lens through which he saw it all. After eating, they continued along the trail, exploring hidden groves and streams. Robert shared memories of Arn Peoples, his mentor and a kind-hearted logger. Claire absorbed every detail, understanding the deep bonds forged over labor and trust. They found a quiet clearing, perfect for resting and observing the flowing stream. Robert knelt to examine the water, pointing out fish weaving through submerged rocks. Claire squatted beside him, letting her fingers trail the cool, flowing current. "The simplest things often carry the most meaning," Robert observed. Claire smiled, feeling the truth of his words in her chest. They lingered until shadows began stretching long across the forest floor. Deciding to return, they retraced their steps slowly, savoring the fading daylight. Back at the cabin, the evening air was crisp, carrying the scent of moss and soil. Claire tended the small herb garden near the porch, humming softly to herself. Robert repaired tools, lining them neatly on the worn workbench inside. Dinner was quiet, shared with gentle conversation and soft smiles. Afterward, they sat by the fire, letting warmth and quiet fill the space. Claire wrote in her notebook, capturing the morning's hike and lingering impressions. Robert watched, appreciating the thoughtfulness she brought to simple moments. Night fell, stars appearing one by one in the clear, dark sky above the forest. Claire stepped outside briefly, taking in the vastness of the starry night. Robert joined her, both standing silently, wrapped in the calm of the moment. "It reminds me of what's important," Claire said softly, eyes scanning the heavens. "Yes," Robert agreed, feeling a deep sense of connection to the world. They returned to the cabin, letting the fire's warmth draw them inside. Before sleep, Claire closed her notebook, satisfied with her reflections and notes. Robert added logs to the fire, watching the glow dance across the room. The night was calm, broken only by distant calls of owls and rustling leaves. The morning arrived with a soft haze, sunlight filtering gently through the pines. Robert stepped outside, boots crunching on frost-kissed ground, as he inhaled deeply. Claire followed, her scarf fluttering lightly in the crisp mountain air. They walked toward the river, water shimmering under the early light like molten silver. Robert paused at a bend, pointing to tracks left by deer in the soft soil. Claire knelt, photographing the delicate patterns left behind in the muddy banks. They moved quietly, savoring the peace of the untouched forest around them. Birdsong filled the air, each call weaving into a natural symphony overhead. Robert spoke of past winters, harsh and long, shaping the land and its people. Claire listened intently, imagining frozen rivers and snow-laden forests in her mind. They reached a fallen log, moss-covered and wide enough to sit comfortably together. Sipping warm tea from a thermos, they watched the sunlight dance on rippling water. Robert told stories of logging days, dangerous yet bonding experiences among men. Claire laughed softly, picturing the rugged men he described with careful precision. The wind shifted, carrying hints of pine resin and distant campfire smoke. Robert traced the outline of a stone by the river, remembering a childhood memory. Claire crouched beside him, curiosity sparkling in her eyes as she asked questions. The river curved, leading them to a small waterfall hidden behind a grove of firs. Mist rose from the cascade, creating tiny rainbows that arched through the morning light. Robert suggested they pause, letting the sound of rushing water fill the silence. Claire closed her eyes, feeling the spray cool her face and refresh her spirit. They shared a quiet meal, sandwiches and fruit eaten amidst the soft, rushing sound. Robert recounted the building of his first cabin, mistakes and lessons learned clearly. Claire noted his resilience, impressed by the quiet strength underlying his stories. They explored a side trail, finding a meadow blanketed with wildflowers in vibrant hues. Butterflies danced lazily among blooms, their wings catching glimmers of sunlight. Robert knelt to examine an unusual flower, explaining its local uses and history. Claire photographed the scene, captivated by the intricate patterns of nature's design. The afternoon sun climbed higher, warming their shoulders as they continued onward. Robert recounted meeting Arn Peoples, a man of immense skill and gentle wisdom. Claire absorbed each story, feeling connected to a world both distant and intimate. They paused near an old stone bridge, moss-covered and arched over a narrow stream. The bridge led to a trail winding up a gentle slope, sunlight filtering through leaves. Robert moved with ease, familiarity guiding each careful step through uneven terrain. Claire followed, noting the subtle changes in flora and terrain along the path. A cool breeze picked up, rustling leaves and carrying the scent of damp earth. Robert paused at a large pine, tracing a carved symbol left decades earlier. He explained the story behind it, connecting past and present through memory and craft. Claire admired the symbol, impressed by the permanence of human touch on nature. They reached a ridge, panoramic views stretching endlessly toward distant hills. Robert pointed to logging sites, old cabins, and the winding railway far below. Claire captured the vista in her camera, documenting the rugged beauty surrounding them. Robert shared memories of friends lost to logging accidents. Cautionary tales lingered. Claire listened quietly, respecting the weight of history in his words. They descended slowly, savoring the final light of afternoon, before returning home. Back at the cabin, shadows stretched long across the frost-speckled yard. Robert tended to his tools, while Claire organized photographs and notes from the day. Dinner was simple, shared with laughter, reflection, and quiet gratitude for the day. Afterward, they settled by the fire, letting warmth and conversation fill the room. Robert spoke of early mornings, spent watching rivers freeze and thaw in patterns. Claire shared her own memories, weaving her past gently into the ongoing narrative. Night deepened, stars appearing gradually through gaps in the towering trees. They stepped outside briefly, letting the crisp air clear their minds and spirits. Returning inside, they added logs to the fire, watching sparks float and vanish. Claire wrote in her journal, documenting moments, impressions, and fleeting emotions. Robert quietly reflected, content in the simplicity and connection of shared time. The cabin settled into quiet, filled only with the sound of crackling flames. They slept peacefully, dreams wandering through forests, rivers, and distant memories. Robert woke to soft sunlight filtering through frost-coated windows, warmth spreading slowly. He stretched, muscles sore from the previous day's long hike through rugged forest trails. Claire was already awake, scribbling in her notebook, sunlight catching her hair just so. They shared a quiet breakfast, the aroma of coffee mingling with crisp morning air. Robert spoke of a logging camp he had visited as a boy, rough men and hard work. Claire listened intently, imagining faces, laughter, and the tension of a dangerous job. After breakfast, they prepared for a walk along the river's meandering, shallow bends. Robert led the way, pointing out tracks of deer and smaller woodland creatures. Claire knelt frequently, capturing details of moss patterns, wildflowers, and unusual stones. The river widened, reflecting clouds and the blue sky, in perfect, glassy clarity. Robert told of a day when he helped construct a bridge over a narrow ravine. Claire imagined the strain on timber and ropes, balancing men above rushing waters. They reached a fallen tree, spanning the river, smooth from decades of flowing water. Robert walked carefully across, testing each step as Claire followed, holding her breath. At the center, they paused, listening to rushing water and birds singing overhead. Robert shared a memory of logging partners lost to a sudden storm, lightning striking trees. Claire shivered, picturing men scrambling, branches crashing down around them. They continued downstream, encountering a small waterfall, cascading into a clear pool. Robert dipped his hand into the icy water, watching ripples extend across the surface. Claire admired his connection to the land, respect for nature evident in each gesture. They followed a narrow path through dense undergrowth. Sunlight dappled through leaves. Robert recounted stories of railroad work, dangerous crossings, and the camaraderie formed. Claire laughed softly at tales of youthful mistakes, men sliding along icy beams. A bird called from above, swooping low, capturing both their attention and delight. Robert paused to observe animal tracks, tracing patterns of rabbits and foxes alike. Claire sketched quickly in her notebook, wanting to capture every fleeting moment. The trail led to a grove of ancient pines, towering like silent, wise guardians. Robert shared legends of spirits dwelling within the trees, guiding those who listened. Claire shivered as a gust passed, carrying whispers and the scent of pine resin. They reached a sunlit clearing, soft grass dotted with early spring wildflowers. Robert knelt to examine a broken branch, explaining how it indicated past storms. Claire noted how the forest preserved its own memory through growth and decay. They rested briefly, sipping water and enjoying quiet companionship amidst beauty. Robert spoke of winter nights, huddled in cabins, snow piling against doors. Claire imagined the crackling fire, the cold wind outside, and the warmth within. They wandered farther, finding a creek where fish darted beneath clear, shallow water. Robert demonstrated how to read water currents, spotting pools rich with trout. Claire captured the scene on film, fascinated by the interplay of light and motion. The sun climbed high, warming their shoulders as they navigated rocky terrain carefully. Robert described his first encounters with settlers and loggers, learning patience and skill. Claire listened, captivated by the vivid detail of a life both harsh and tender. They arrived at a wooden bridge, old and weathered, crossing a small ravine. Robert explained the importance of maintenance, how each plank bore the weight of time. Claire ran her hand over carved initials, imagining stories left behind by travelers. They descended toward the riverbank, discovering a patch of wild strawberries ripening early. Robert picked some, handing them to Claire, both tasting sweetness amidst the cool air. A gentle breeze rustled leaves, carrying faint echoes of distant forest sounds. Robert shared memories of logging accidents, reflecting on mortality and careful labor. Claire nodded, absorbing lessons of caution, respect, and the passage of time. They reached a hilltop clearing, panorama stretching across river, forest, and distant hills. Robert paused, inhaling the view, letting memories of decades wash over him quietly. Claire photographed the scene, mindful of light, shadow, and timeless beauty of the land. Returning to the cabin, they found shadows stretching long, signaling the day's end. Robert prepared the fire, while Claire organized sketches, notes, and photographs taken. Dinner was quiet, filled with conversation, laughter, and reflection on their shared day. Afterward, they sat near the fireplace, warmth enveloping them as night deepened. Robert reflected on his childhood, logging work, and years spent connecting with land. Claire shared insights from her travels, observing nature and human impact across regions. Stars appeared slowly, punctuating the darkness with cold, distant light above the forest. They stepped outside, letting crisp night air fill their lungs, calming and refreshing. Returning indoors, they watched the fire crackle, sparks dancing upward in darkness. Robert recounted moments of his wife and daughter, feeling their presence in the woods. Claire observed quietly, sensing the depth of his memory and quiet longing. Sleep came peacefully, dreams carrying them along rivers, forests, and distant landscapes. Robert awoke to mist curling above the Moyi River, sunlight faint through fog. He dressed quickly, the crisp morning air biting his cheeks as he stepped outside. Claire had already packed supplies for a day exploring deeper forest trails nearby. They walked in silence at first, the only sounds birds calling and water flowing. Robert shared stories of winter storms that tore through cabins, leaving only memories. Claire listened, noting the resilience required to endure harsh seasons and isolation. A deer darted across their path, frozen briefly as they observed its graceful escape. Robert smiled, recalling similar sightings from his youth, always moments of wonder. They reached a ridge overlooking the valley, mist swirling among towering pine trees. Robert described past logging accidents, men narrowly escaping falling timber and ice. Claire jotted notes and sketches, capturing the raw beauty of untamed wilderness. The path narrowed, roots and stones requiring careful navigation with each cautious step. Robert spoke of a friend, Ann Peoples, lost to a sudden treefall during work. Claire expressed sorrow, sensing the deep impact of loss on a lifetime of labor. They discovered a hidden grove, sunlight dappling the forest floor with golden light. Robert kneeled, touching moss and ferns, explaining forest cycles and natural regeneration. Claire photographed patterns of growth, textures, and small creatures moving unseen. A stream cut through the grove, water clear, reflecting clouds in the forest canopy. Robert taught Claire to read water patterns, predicting currents, and hiding spots of fish. They paused to rest, listening to insects, the river, and occasional distant bird calls. Robert recalled winter nights in this forest, howling winds and icy snowdrifts. Claire shivered slightly, imagining isolation and the courage required to face it. They followed a trail leading to a cliffside, panoramic views of mountains and river bends. Robert reflected on decades of observing nature, its lessons shaping patience and wisdom. Claire photographed the vista, capturing sweeping landscapes with delicate attention. Robert shared memories of a logging camp, where men forged friendships under harsh conditions. Claire asked about specific challenges, dangers, and camaraderie within these rough communities. Robert recalled stories of accidents, laughter, and small victories that shaped his youth. The trail descended into a valley, roots slick with moss and dampness from morning dew. Robert explained forest navigation, hidden hazards, and the value of awareness at all times. Claire listened, absorbing knowledge and reflecting on human interaction with nature. They reached a small clearing. Wildflowers dotted the landscape in early spring bloom. Robert picked a few, sharing their names and medicinal uses known to local settlers. Claire noted each detail, fascinated by the interconnection of flora, fauna, and human life. They followed the riverbank, spotting fish darting beneath clear, reflective waters. Robert described fishing techniques, patience, and respect for aquatic life, observed in youth. Claire captured images of the stream, stones, and small wildlife hiding under overhangs. The sun climbed higher, warming their shoulders as they continued through rugged terrain. Robert spoke of encounters with travelers and settlers, learning lessons from their stories. Claire admired his memory, detail, and the intimacy of shared experiences across decades. They discovered an abandoned cabin, charred remains of a past fire evident on logs. Robert paused, recounting rebuilding efforts and resilience after destruction in his life. Claire imagined solitude and determination required to restore a home and livelihood. They rested briefly, water bottles in hand, observing birds and forest movements nearby. Robert shared memories of lost family members, lingering grief, and enduring love. Claire nodded, connecting with the human experience woven into natural landscapes. The trail led them back toward the cabin, shadows stretching with late afternoon sun. Robert prepared the fire, while Claire organized sketches, notes, and collected samples. Dinner was quiet, filled with conversation reflecting on discovery, memory, and time past. They stepped outside after eating, cool air wrapping them in gentle evening chill. Stars began to appear, faint at first, then bright as darkness deepened over the forest. Robert reflected on decades of life, labor, love, and loss, feeling a profound calm. Claire observed quietly, appreciating depth of connection between man, memory, and nature. Robert awoke early, mist still hovering above the river, faint light touching trees. He brewed coffee over a small fire, the aroma mixing with damp forest scents nearby. Claire stepped outside, stretching, listening to birds and distant calls echoing through pines. Robert recounted memories of youth, traveling railroads, and witnessing early logging operations. Claire asked questions about men he worked with and dangers faced along the way. Robert described friendships, rivalries, and the constant presence of life and death risks. They hiked toward a ridge, sun breaking through clouds, illuminating distant mountain peaks. Robert paused, tracing the path of a long-forgotten railroad line through the valley. He explained how railroads connected isolated towns and shaped the development of communities. Claire observed, taking notes and capturing images of old wooden bridges and rail ties. Robert recalled a Chinese worker, Fu Sheng, thrown from a bridge long ago. He spoke of guilt, regret, and recurring visions that haunted him through decades of labor. Claire listened silently, realizing the weight of memories carried through years of solitude. The trail led to a waterfall cascading into a quiet pool, mist cooling their faces. Robert described winter hazards, slippery rocks, and frost forming over icy streams. They rested near the water, observing fish and insects moving through the clear, shallow pool. Robert reflected on An peoples, lost in a logging accident, teaching the fragility of life. Claire nodded, understanding the subtle lessons the forest had embedded in him. They continued through dense woods, pine needles soft underfoot, occasional squirrels darting. Robert recounted fires that destroyed cabins, and the process of rebuilding from ashes. Claire noted human resilience, mirrored in the cycles of nature around them each day. A sudden hawk swooped overhead, Robert pointing out flight patterns and hunting techniques. They crossed a small bridge, river babbling beneath, memories of childhood flooding his mind. Robert told stories of early encounters with settlers and the building of his own home. Claire listened intently, connecting historical narratives to the natural landscape around them. The sun climbed higher, birds sung louder, and distant mountains hazed with afternoon light. Robert spoke of Kate, his daughter, her fleeting presence, and the pain of absence felt. Claire reflected on family, loss, and the endurance of human spirit across time and space. They reached a meadow, wildflowers scattered, bees busy among petals, air fragrant and fresh. Robert crouched, observing insect life, explaining ecological balance and interdependence with humans. Claire photographed and sketched, fascinated by patterns and life thriving despite challenges. They moved slowly through the grass, each step bringing memories of earlier days in Idaho. Robert recalled winter storms, early hardships, and lessons learned from observing nature's resilience. Claire absorbed details, understanding the delicate balance between human history and wilderness. Robert paused at an old tree stump, recalling conversations with fellow loggers and neighbors. Claire noted markings on wood, remnants of past work, and symbols of enduring legacy. The forest thickened, light dimming beneath dense canopy, sounds of wildlife all around. Robert spoke softly of solitude, connection to land, and learning from experiences over decades. Claire asked about early rail work, the men, the machinery, and dangers encountered daily. Robert explained precise timing, strength, and trust required in railroad construction and logging. They descended into a valley, river narrowing, reflections mirroring sky and surrounding trees. Robert spoke of winter nights by fires, stories shared, laughter, and unspoken fears held close. Claire observed river patterns, small fish darting, and imagined life during Robert's youth. They paused at a bend, sunlight dappled through leaves, painting shadows on forest floor. Robert recalled a vigilante incident, the peril of justice and revenge among early settlers. Claire asked questions, noting human complexity intertwined with natural landscape and survival. Robert shared lessons from old friends, mistakes made, and wisdom gained over years. Evening approached, and the forest shifted colors, reds and golds, mixing with shadows. Robert and Claire returned to the cabin, fire already warm, casting glow on wooden walls. Dinner was quiet, reflection on stories, shared understanding of life, loss, and work. After eating, they stepped outside, watching stars emerge one by one over silent forest. Robert spoke of John Glenn's flight, marveling at human progress and connection to the cosmos. Claire shared thoughts on observation, memory, and the passage of time in natural surroundings. They settled for the night, sounds of river and wind lulling them into restful sleep. Dreams carried Robert through memories, trains, rivers, and moments of long-lost family.